Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Many of you have asked and here it finally comes. We're going to talk about Firebase. And if you don't know what Firebase is, it is a backend as a service provider and it gives you a whole lot of great features. So it's kind of like Parse, which is going to shut down next year in February. And it's also kind of like a CloudKit. We dealt with both providers on this channel already. And so here is Firebase, which gives you, for example, a real-time database. It gives you user authentication. It gives you notifications. It gives you a whole lot of things. And you can check it out at firebase.google.com. And there's also a list of features that you can have a look at. And if you have a look at the pricing, it's really fair. So if you're using the free tier, you get, for example, 100 of some simultaneous connections. You get 1 gigabyte of real-time database storage, and we are going to use the real-time database today in this tutorial. And before we get started with our example app, which is FireSwiffer, and if you know my channel, you know that when we're talking about backend as a service provider, and then we're creating something like Twitter-like app, which we're going to do in a second. But before we get started, let me give you a quick update on Swift Tutorial Conference. And if you followed along with my channel, you know that this September I'm going to host a complete Swift Tutorial Conference with a lot of great trainers. We've got great examples. And there's also going to be the STC App Award. So within the next week, you can sign up for this App Award and hand in your apps that are already released to the App Store. And a jury will then select 10 really great apps and you can win awesome prizes. And in addition, you will also get the chance when you attend a Swift Tutorial Conference to network online. So you can meet developers from all around the world. And the best, again, Swift Tutorial Conference is completely free. So if you haven't already signed up, just go to swifttutorialconference.net and register now for free. And you will get a whole lot of benefits by attending. So I'm pretty excited. And now let's get started. I'm going to show you what this FireSwiffer actually does. So we have a pretty simple login here. So I can actually log in here with test at brianadvent.com and password, very good password, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I can sign in. And once I'm signed in, I can click on the plus button here to add an item to our timeline here. So I'm just going to write something like hello world and save that. And if I do the same thing on another device, I have another iPhone here, so I'm going to write hello world 2 here and press save. And then in a matter of 1 second, we really update it here completely automatically. So this is just a bit like Twitter, and we're going to create that right now. So with the login and with saving and retrieving data from Firebase. And to get started, what we like to do is bring up Firebase, and you need a Google account for that, or you can just create one, or whatever you like. So what we want to do is go to console.firebase.google.com, and then we will simply hit this blue button here where it says create new project, and here I will state my project name, which is FireSwiffer, and I will create that project here and wait, and here we go. And then it asks us that we can choose what we actually want to do. We can add Firebase to an Android application, to an iOS application, or to a web application. And of course, we want to create a Firebase iOS application, so I select that. And the first step that we need to perform is we need to add our bundle ID here. So this is your reverse domain name that you usually also use for your Xcode project. So I'm going to hit com.training .fireswiffer. That's what we're going to create. And then we'll simply click on add app here in the lower right corner. And once this is done, it downloads a Google Service info plist to our downloads folder. And we're going to use that later when we've created our Xcode project. And for now, we will simply click on continue. And now it says that Google uses CocoaPods for installing Firebase. And that's what we are going to do. And if you're not familiar with CocoaPods, just click on that link, which will bring us to this website. And here it says that CocoaPods is a dependency manager for Swift and of Objective-C Cocoa projects. And CocoaPods is just great because if you're working together with third-party frameworks, then there are sometimes dependencies to other frameworks, and CocoaPods makes it really easy to manage those dependencies. And you shouldn't confuse that with Git, because Git only gives you version control, whereas CocoaPods gives you dependency management. And this works with the terminal, so I'm going to bring up my terminal here, and to see if you've already installed CocoaPods on your computer, you can simply type in pod, which will give you this overview here about different commands that you can use. And if you don't see that, then you probably need to install CocoaPods by simply entering this command into your terminal. And then it takes some time to download and install all the components, and then you're good to go and you can use CocoaPods. And what we want to do now is create an Xcode project which we are going to call FireSwiffer. So here we go. I'm going to create a single view application. I'm calling it FireSwiffer. And as you can see, the bundle ID is identical to what I've entered earlier in Firebase. So I click Next and create that on my desktop. What I'm also going to do is I already downloaded one of those plists, so I'm going to remove the old one and make sure that this is called Google Service Info plist, and just drag and drop that into my project. And I will make sure that this is called that add to targets is selected, and also copy items if needed is selected, and then we will simply add that. And what we can do now is close Xcode for a moment, bring up the terminal again. So here we go, and then if we go back to the Firebase console, let me put that side by side, then all we need to do is call pod init. But the important thing about working together with CocoaPods is that you call this pod init first if you're actually positioned in the correct directory. So what we need to do is we need to switch to the desktop where I've located my Firebase project, or my Firebase Xcode project, and this is called FireSwiffer. So I'm entering that with the cd command, so to change the directory. And once I'm in that, I can have a look if I'm at the correct position by writing ls. And as you can see, we've got our FireSwiffer folder and the FireSwiffer Xcode project right here. And then what we want to do is write pod init. And calling pod init will give us a simple pod file, as you can see here. And I will simply open that up by using Xcode. And this is what such a pod file looks. And now all we need to do is copy this line here, pod Firebase, which states what we actually want to add to our project right here. So we're using the pod Firebase, we saved that. And then we can go back to our terminal and simply hit pod install. And then it will take a second, and I have to allow that with my firewall that it does that. And as soon as it is downloaded, we are going to continue. So while I made myself a coffee, it downloaded and installed Firebase, and also note this statement here that from now on, we should actually not use our Xcode project any longer. We now need to use the FireSwiffer Xcode workspace. So let's bring that up. And let me increase the window size a little. And as you can see here, we now have kind of two projects here. We have the FireSwiffer, which is our real project. And we have this pods project here, which contains all of the pods frameworks that it downloaded, like Firebase, Firebase Analytics, Google Utilities, and so on. And if we have a look at the pod file, there is the pod Firebase, and we will simply add more pods to our workspace later as we continue. But for now, let's start with using Firebase for a moment. So we will bring up the app delegate file, and first of all, what we need to do is import the Firebase framework, which we can do right here. And now it's going to be cool, because all we need to do to actually get in touch with our with the Firebase servers is run firapp.configure, and that's it. And if we now run the application, let's choose the simulator here, we will see some console output, and we will see that we are connected with Firebase. And all of the configuration and all of the settings are noted in your Google Service Info plist. And as you can see, the firewall already knows that we want to connect to a Google server, so I'm going to allow that. And if we have a look at that, we can see now that Fire Instance ID App Delegate Proxy is enabled, and also Firebase Analytics is enabled, and so on. So we have successfully connected to Firebase, and it can now continue with our work. And to actually continue, what we need to do is manage authentication, because we cannot add or remove data or change data from in our real-time database if we do not use an authenticated user. So to do that, let's open up the Firebase console again. So we should see something like this, or we can choose Fire Swiffer here. We can then choose authentication here from the sidebar. And the first thing we want to do is actually add an authentication method. So as you can see, you have different methods here, like email and password. You can use Google accounts, Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, or even GitHub accounts. And we're going to use email password for authentication. And so I'm clicking on the pen here, activate that, and save. And once I return back to users, I can add a user with that button. So let me click on that and entering a user here. And then also a highly secure password, which is 123456. And then I simply add that user here. And we can now continue to use this demo user in the future. So let's go back to our Xcode project, and for development purposes, simply sign us in with this email address and password. But before we can actually use that email address and password, we should have a look at the documentation, which is really great. And we'll have a look at the Get Started guide for iOS. And there we will find a section about authentication, and then also about password authentication. And as you can see, before we can begin, we need to add this pod to our pod file. So I'm going to copy this pod, add it to our pod file in Xcode, save it, and then I will bring up my terminal again, and again hit pod install. And as you can see, while it works, things are going to start happening in Xcode. And if we have a look at the pods folder here, then we now have Firebase authentication. And with that done, what we can do is we can now call FIR authentication in app delegate, and within the did finish launching with options function. And what we want to do is use the authentication method here and sign in with email and password. So our email is now test@brianadvent.com. You can of course choose everything you like, and the password is 123456. And then we get a completion handler where we will receive a user and also an error. And then you can do your error handling here. So we can, for example, check if error is equal to nil. So if there is no error, we can print our user data, for example, and we could check what is the user's email, for example. And then also if it actually fails, so if there is something in this error object, we can of course print the error's description and see what went wrong. So let's run our application again and have a look at the console output here down below. And there we go. As you can see, we have this optional with our email address and no error. And now we are logged in and ready to use our Firebase real-time database. And with these many setup steps, let's now maybe have a look at our user interface. So I'm opening up the main storyboard, and we will then step by step create now first a user interface, then our model for the user and the suites. And then we will continue implementing our table view controller. And talking about table view controller here, we have only a view controller, which we are going to remove from our view controller scene. And we want to bring up a table view controller. So let's drag that up right here. And also let's directly embed this table view controller into a navigation controller by clicking on editor and then embed in navigation controller. And then we are good to go. We should select the navigation controller then, use the attributes inspector and mark this one as initial view controller. You can also maybe select the navigation bar in the navigation controller right now, give it a nice bar tint color. Let's use something that resembles fire a little bit, something like this maybe, not just to give it a nice look. And then we will double click here into the navigation bar, calling this Fire Swiffer, and then let's add 2 bar button items. So let's enter bar but and let's drag one to the right side and one to the left side. This one I'm going to simply name login. Could also say login sign up, but I just keep it short. And for the right item, I'm using the system style add. And here we go. So this is pretty much all the setup we need. We just need to select the table view cell. I'm going to use the scene here, give it a reuse identifier, which is going to be cell, and I'm going to give the table view style subtitle as a property here, so that we have a title and a subtitle that we can use for the suite and actually for the user. Right below it. And all we need to do now is actually remove our view controller, our view controller file here, because we want to deal with a real table view controller. So I move that to the trash. So I select my app delegate.swift file, press Command N on the keyboard, select iOS source, and we want to create a Cocoa touch class. And this is going to be my suites subclass of UI table view controller. All right, so let's click next and create that. And with that done, we simply have to connect our table view controller with that class. So let's choose the suites table view controller here. And then let's go into this table view controller. Let's remove everything we don't need. So all the comments here. Let's also remove tons of the functions here. So let's just remove that for now. Also, we don't use that receive memory warning. And let's also remove those warnings here. And let's return one section. Let's also remove the comments around self-row at index path. Let's enter the correct reuse identifier cell. And with that, let's give our application a quick try just to see if everything works. And then we will just move on. So here we are, we have the Fire Swiffer, we have Login Plus, and we have our table view. So we're good to go. So let's create a model for our suites and for the users. And to do that, we will create 2 types, one type for the user and one for the suites. So let's press Command N on the keyboard. This time we only want to create a Swift file. And I will call this first one user. Create, and as you can see, we still need to import for user purposes. We need to import Firebase authentication. We will create a struct for user, and this will give us a type that we can use later on. We don't need a class for that. And the first thing that we want to do is give it a UID, which it gets from Firebase, and then also an email, which is also going to be a string. Then we will have 2 different initialization methods. So we have first time authenticate an initialization with user data, which is going to be FIR user as a parameter. And then we can use that to populate our UID. So authentication or user data and its UID. Then we can also check if we have an email address. So let's check if there is user data, and then we use the provider data array that is part of the FIR user class, and then we'll simply ask for the first element and its email. And then if we get something here, we will use that to put that into our email property here. And if not, we will simply make email an empty string. So here we go, and we've initialized both properties. So let's move on to another initialization if we want to use arbitrary data. So we'll simply use a UID here, which is a string, and also an email as a string. And then we can again populate self UID with UID and self email with email. All right, so with that we have our user type. Let's create another type for our suite. So again, just a Swift file, which we are going to call suite. And this time what we want to import is the Firebase database. So Firebase, and we can't use database yet because we still have to use that pod. And as you can see, again, we have real-time database here. We have a get started section, and in the documentation, and if it loads, we have now here the pod specified that we need to use. So I'm going to copy that, go back to my pod file, paste it right here, go back to my terminal, run pod install again, and here we go, installing Firebase database, and we are done. So let's bring up our suite type again, and now we can hopefully import Firebase database, and here we go. Let's define another structure to get a suite data type. And as you've already seen, when we've created the user data type, this is going to help us later deal with the data that we will receive or also send up to the cloud using Firebase. And what we will do here is define again some properties like key, which is a string, and we will receive that from Firebase. We will also define a content property here, which is the content of our tweet or suite, or we call it suite from now on, and also the user or the, let's call it added by user string that defines who actually added that suite. And also what we can do is create an item reference property, which is an FIR database reference. We will make that optional because when we create such an object from our suite data type, from arbitrary data, then we don't get this reference. We only get that from Firebase, as you will see later. So let's first of all create an initialization method to deal with arbitrary data. And first of all, we will have a content string as a parameter. We'll have added by user, which is also a string. And we have the key, which is also a string, which by default is going to be an empty string. And then we'll simply initialize all the properties with key, with content, and also with added by user. And because we have defined the item reference as optional, we can set this to nil. And if we get data from Firebase, then we can create another initialization function and just pass along a so-called snapshot. Not snapshot, but snapshot, which is an FIR data snapshot, which gives us, and I will make this like this, which gives us a snapshot which gives us the data from a particular moment. So we can now access this snapshot, for example, to populate the key property by simply using snapshot.key. And as you can see, this is the location that generated this FIR data snapshot. And then we can also use this to populate the item reference. And this is going to be the reference. It gets a FIR database reference for the location that this data came from. And we, of course, only get that if we get data from Firebase. And then we can populate the content and also the added by user property, and we'll create an if let statement for that purpose. So this is first of all the suite content. Let's assign snapshot dot value and unwrap that. And as you can see now, I'm accessing this just like a dictionary because as we will see in a moment, Firebase saves all its data as JSON trees, and JSON and dictionaries go so well together that we can use this dictionary access method like this, and we will now simply use content here as a key and cast that to a string. And if that worked, what we can do is use the content and assign suite content, and if not, content is going to be an empty string. And then we could also copy that, paste it right here. Then we have the suite user, we have added by user, then again added by user, suite user. So just like that, and if we build that, we shouldn't see any errors. And if you create such a data type with the structure, always make sure to initialize all of the properties that you have defined, either otherwise you will get an error. So with our data model created with the user and the suite, we can now move on. Let's first of all group them together in a model folder or in a model group, and let's move to our suite table view controller, and there we will actually create two properties for that suite table view controller class. The first one is going to be a database reference. Let's call it dbref, and this is again going to be an FIR database reference, which we can only use if we import the correct class. So we will import Firebase database, and also let's import Firebase authentication, because we are going to deal with authentication also in this class. So again, let's use a FIR database reference. And the cool thing now about, and this is also different from, for example, Parse or what CloudKit does, we can now define a path to the data that we'd like to access. So in view.load, we're going to initialize this this property by using the db reference property and assign FIR database, call database function reference, and then what we would get is a URL to the root of our JSON tree, and we can now append something here by using the child function, and then we get a path string parameter here, and what we can do is we could call that suite items. So by adding different children here to our database reference, this is a way to structure your data in the JSON hierarchy. If we just use Firebase database reference, we would reach the root of our JSON tree. So let's maybe have a quick look at that. Let's go to the console. Let's bring up our project, which is FireSwiffer, and have a look at the database. And as you can see here, we have FireSwiffer here. We could click on plus, and we would be right here at this point if we just used that reference. Now, by adding a child, we are actually adding this child that that we just did by clicking on the plus icon here, and we are now going to add our first suite in code, and this will give you the possibility to see actually what we were just talking about. And let's make one adjustment to the user interface for that. So we'll bring up our storyboard here. I'm going to select the plus button, bring up the assistant editor, and maybe right below view.load, I will create an action called add suite. It's going to be an action. So let's create that. Closing the assistant editor, go back right here. And we are going to do that with an alert controller. So let's call this suite alert. It's going to be UI alert controller. Enter your suite, or let's call that new suite. Enter your suite as a string here, and this is going to be an alert controller. So let's pass that along, and we're going to need a text field. So let's use suite alert, add text field with configuration, and we can also add a configuration here if we like. So we could, for example, say that the text field's placeholder text is going to be your suite. And then what we want to do is add an action, so UI alert, action, title, send, default style, and here's our handler, which will receive an action as a parameter. And the first thing we actually need to do is add a closing parenthesis here, and we will need the content of our text field. To get that, we'll create our suite content, for example, by using the suite alert, its text fields, its first element, because this is an array, we will use the first element, and its text property. So let's just make an if-let out of this. So if this works, what we can do is actually send our suite. And to do that, we will create a new suite object. And since we have created a type for that, we are now pretty happy because we can now just create a suite with content and with a user. And the content, of course, is going to be the suite content, and I'm simply entering Brian Advent here as the user. And with that, we have created a suite object that we can now pass along to Firebase. And to actually do that, we will create a suite reference. To do that, we will use our database reference, which we need to call with self because we're within a closure. Add a child, and all we need to do, we need to name that child somehow. So what we need to do is, for example, use our suite content and use the lowercase string. And with that, we have created a reference or a name for our suite. And then we can use our suite reference to set a value or to add data to this Firebase reference. And as you can see, it requires an any object, not just a suite type. So what we can do to help that is to go back to our model, go into our suite, and create one last helper function here, which will be function to any object. And this, of course, will return an any object. And we will now simply call return. And as I said, JSON and dictionaries go very well together. So we'll simply create a dictionary here that our JSON tree is going to understand. So, and here, actually, it is important to pay attention to what kind of keys we used here. So again, we use content as a key, and the value is going to be our content property from here, from our suite property. And the next key value pair is, of course, going to be added by user. So we're going to add that right here. And the value is going to be added by user. And since we don't have any more information to pass along, we're just finished here. We can go back to our suite table view controller, call set value, And then we will simply use our suite that we've just created and call to any object. Build that, make sure we have all parentheses in place, and we're good to go. And if we now run our application and we also make sure to display our alert view, we will call self present view controller suite alert, set this to true, don't need a completion handler. Then we will run our application and let's see what happens. So I'm pressing the plus button. We see our alert controller. I'm entering hello world, exclamation mark, and I send that. And of course we do not see anything yet here. But if we go back to our Firebase console, you can now see that here's our root. And within the root, we have added a child, which is called suite items. And here we go. Here are the suite items. And if I now open that up, we have our hello world item that we've just created. And as you can see, we have added by user Brian Advent with the content hello world. And this is corresponding with the dictionary that we have created here. So as you can see, it's pretty simple actually, but you have to get the hang out of this JSON tree that corresponds with dictionaries in your application. Let's now have a look at how we can display information that is written into our Firebase database, and also how to access them in real time, because it says it's a real-time database. And to do that, we will create a new function here, which we'll call start observing database. And we can now use our database reference and observe event type with block, and we will also use the cancel block. And we'll now simply listen for changes of a value. You can also listen for example, child removed or child changed or child added, but we will listen for value changes. And then we will get a block here. We can get a snapshot here as a parameter and add some code here. And then there is this cancel block, which will give us an error that we can also check. So we could print the error and its description here, or do some more advanced error handling. But for now, let's keep it that way. And what we can do now is we first of all create a new property for our class, which we're going to call suites. And this is going to be an array of suite objects. And within our closure here of observe event type, what we want to do is create a variable for new items. And this is also going to be an array of suites. So let's maybe not call this new items. Let's call it new suites. All right. So with that done, we can now use a for loop to iterate through the different suites that we got from our snapshot that we received from the Firebase database. So let's create a suite object in the snapshot and its children. And these children are all going to be suite objects, but we need to cast them to that. So let's create a suite object with the suite type, and now we can actually use our snapshot, and therefore we will simply use the suite and cast that to an FIR data snapshot. And now you can see why it was useful to create those two functions for our suites, these two init functions. The one for if we get arbitrary data, and the other one if we receive data from our Firebase database. And with that done, we now have a suite object, or we have a list of suite objects, and we just need to append them to our new suites array. So let's add the suite object here. And then we can update self.suites with our new suites array here, and then also call self.tableview, reload data. So let's scroll down to number of rows in sections, and then we can simply use suites.count to get the number of rows in a section. And what we also need to do now is, of course, define the cell for row at index path function. And therefore, we will first of all need to get a suite. We use the suites array that we have defined as property, access it with index path dot row, and then we can use the cell and its text label and its text, and then simply use suite dot content for its content and cell dot detail text label dot text to use the suite and its added by user property. And with that done, let's have a look at it and run the application and see if we can see our first suite. So here we are, and nothing happens because we haven't called our function here, start observing data. So let's do that in view.load and run the application again. And now we should be able to see our first suite. And there we go. Hello world from Brian Advent. And now let's see what makes this real world, a real-time database by deleting this first suite from the database. And here you go. It's automatically deleted, and we simply have the root of our JSON tree. So let's add a new one, new suite, send that, and here we go. We have another suite very quickly, second suite, and here we go. As you can see, this works pretty nicely and also pretty quickly, and this is really cool. So now, although this should be an app like Swiffer, let me an app like Twitter. So we actually see tweets here, and you don't usually delete tweets of other people, but let me just quickly show you how you can actually delete stuff from your database. So to do that, let's implement table view commit editing style, and then we will check if editing style is equal to delete. Then we will create a suite object again using suites and index path dot row, and then all we need to do is use that suite, use its item reference, and that's why we have created this item reference property within the suite type, and then we can remove the value. And this tail view commit editing style for row at index path does nothing else but give me the opportunity here now to actually swipe to delete. So let's bring up both screens again, and if I now swipe here and delete the second tweet, you immediately see that changes affect our Firebase database. And now for the last part of this tutorial, what we want to do is deal with registration and sign up. So let's go back to app delegate, and at the moment we are signing in our users, or our one user, by directly doing that when we launch the application. Let's now comment that by adding some comments here, and go back to the storyboard and create a new action for the login button. And we will do that right here, maybe below view.load, call this login and sign up. It's going to be an action, connect that, close the assistant editor, go back to our suites table view controller. And what we can do now here is defining another alert controller. Let me call that user alert. It's going to be UI alert controller with title, message, and so on. It's going to be login, sign up, message, enter, email, and password. It's going to be an alert. And then we will need two text fields and two buttons. So let's user alert add text field with configuration. So text field, give it a placeholder. It's going to be email, user alert add text field, text field. Oh, let me do that lowercase as well to stay consistent. UI text field, and here we will do two things. First of all, use the text field and make it for secure text entry property. Set this to true so that we don't see the password, and then text field placeholder password, and then we will use an action, add action UI alert action title. Let's start with sign in. It's going to be default style. Here we have the handler, and let's copy that one, paste it here. I think we forgot one parenthesis again. So let's paste it right here again. Build that. All right, works. And instead of sign in, we tell it to be titled sign up, and then we will simply use self present view controller user alert, set this to true, set this to nil, and then we're good to go. And again, we need some information from the text fields. So what we want to do for, let's create an email text field, which is going to be the user alert and the text fields and the first element of this array. And let's actually unwrap them right here. We know that they exist, and we can do that in that case. And we know that it's the first element because we defined it first. So actually the password text field should be the last element. So again, user alert, text fields, and then let's use last here. And again, let's directly unwrap everything. And with that done, we can actually now use Firebase authentication again. So FIR authentication, use the authentication function here. And then we will simply say sign in with email, password, and completion. So we have email, so use the email text field .text and also unwrap that. And we have the password text field .text and also unwrap that. And then we get a callback here. We have a user and we have an error. And then we can, for example, check if the error is not equal to nil. Then we want to print the error. Print. Come on. Print the error's description. And we're going to do something pretty similar in the sign up action. So let's copy email text field and password text field. And let's now use FIR authentication and the authentication function. And this time we will not sign in, but we will create a user with email and password. So again, email text field .text, unwrap this, password text field .text, unwrap this. And again, we get a completion handler here where we could do something interesting. And we will simply check if error is not equal to nil. Then we want to print the error and its description. So this is a pretty simple implementation of a login and sign up. So we could check that out in a second, but let me add another piece of code that is pretty useful, and we are going to do that in view did appear, which we will have to add to our class. So let's add view did appear, and since we're overriding it, let's also call the super view did appear with the animated parameter. And then what we want to do is actually check if we have a user already signed in or need to sign up first, because if not, we need to actually log in before we can display any data. So to do that and check if a user is already signed in or if we have a current user, we use FIR authentication and the authentication function again and add an authentication did change listener. And with that listener, we get an FIR authentication parameter here, which I am going to call all authentication, and we get a user. And what we can do now is we can check if we have a user and assign that one here. And then, for example, print welcome and user and its email. And we should also start observing our database, because only if we are a registered user, we should be able to do so. And if that is not the case, we will print you need to sign up or log in first. So let's run this application and see what kind of a console output we get. And as you can see, we get welcome Brian Advent. And if we now did that on another device, let's say an iPhone 6, and this is going to take a while, so before we can see something, so let's just wait for a second. And here we are. And as you can see now, it says error, and also you need to sign up or log in first. So let's do that. Let's log in. Let's sign up. Let's do something at brianadvent.com, password 123456, and let's do a sign up, and let's see if we get something. Although, okay, we see at least welcome and the optional, but we can't see anything because we haven't added any suites anymore. We haven't added suites here at the moment, so let's do hello world again. We should only see something if the sign up actually worked, and it did. So this is a very simple app like Twitter, which is Fire Swiffer, and I hope you can use that to integrate Firebase in many of your applications. If you want to check out if you understood the core concept, why don't you try to actually add the real username beneath the real suite, because at the moment we have this static Brian Advent here added by user parameter, and maybe you could try out to actually add the real username or email to that suite. And also tell me if Firebase is a better alternative for you than, for example, ParsWAS or CloudKit. Personally, I think that that CloudKit has its charm when it comes to simply opening an app and already be logged in. But on the other hand, Firebase gives us the opportunity to develop for different platforms on the web, on Android, and also on iOS. So just let me know what you think about that and have fun exploring that example. And don't forget to register for Swift Tutorial Conference. So thanks for watching, and see you next week.